Patrick Cook here. Welcome to session number 10 of our Mandelbulb3D Epic Rendering tutorial series. In the last session, we were looking at this big render. We were talking about how we pulled in the import, the actual params. We pulled them in. It took our resolution up here. All right. And then automatically gave us a default of 4x4 tiles and positioning us to go. All right. Now, there's a couple things that we're going to talk about here. This anti-aliasing is one that we'll talk about, sharpening, the output. We'll get to all of this stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to knock that down to anti-aliasing of 1 just to simplify this demonstration. But we will talk about that. I'm going to output as a PNG. We'll talk about these two. All right, more depth. I'm going to turn off this Z buffer for now. I want a simple demonstration for you. That's all I want. All right, now, it's not going to let me render. Well, matter of fact, let's try it. All right, no tiles to render. All right. The reason for that is I have to save this project. So I'm going to go ahead and save it, and I'm going to call it, well, okay, here we go. I'm going to call it Big Render 9K by 4x4 tiles. Okay, so there we go. Okay, I've saved the project. Now it's going to let me render. All right, but I'm going to turn on this automatic, which means that it will automatically render each of these tiles. We're going to talk about that in more detail. I'm just trying to do a quick demo. All right, so let's render. All right, now what it's doing, let's see if I can get this render box back up. Here we go. Now what it's doing right now is it has sent the information for this one tile up to the main, and it's rendering in this main. It renders in the main. And so it's right now it's doing the main rendering of the second tile. And then it's going to do ambient shadows, because ambient shadows has been set to automatically on. We'll get to that. All right, ambient shadows, and then this second tile here is going to illuminate white to indicate that that tile has been rendered. All right, meanwhile, I am going to go see if I can find them for you. There we go. Okay, okay, it's working on the ambient shadows now of tile number 2. All right, so what this is doing is let's see if I can get this over here for you. What it's doing is it's outputting each of the tiles into a folder that it has automatically created. The folder's name is exactly the same as the project name. All right, so it has rendered this one tile and has outputted it. Now obviously, this is, if you can picture the Mandelbulb object, is right in the middle there. All right, so this blue area, the sky, and actually it's not sky, it's transparent. So it's rendered a tile all the way up in this upper corner here, so we haven't actually hit the Mandelbulb object yet. But now this does give us an opportunity to talk about why we might want to render a file size that is much bigger than, say, our actually Mandelbulb object that's in the center. We may actually want to render high resolution to give us the room to crop. All right, we get to decide to crop so that we can kind of remove segments or boundaries that we don't want. All right. And if you render something where you've got excess pixels that you can then decide if you want to crop those out or not, it's one use case for going with a big render that that actually gives us more picture than we're ultimately going to need. All right, so now this is the second tile is indicated by white. It does not indicate in the grid here the tile that's working on. It only indicates the tiles that have been completed in terms of having been rendered. So we have the second tile right here. All right, and I just loaded that up in my photo viewer. Okay. So that right there is the second tile. This was the first tile right up in here. All right, now this is the second tile, and that's what we look like. And you can see here that I have an image that is, all right, there it is, 6750, and here it is up in here. All right, and here it is down here in the big render window, 6750, just like they promised. All right, by 4500. There's my 4500 and my 4500. All right, so this process will continue on until all of these tiles have been rendered. All right. Now, all right, we got a few minutes left in this session. I want to allow this rendering to continue because I do want you to see all of the files once it's all done. All right. So we don't need to have that in our way right now. We'll just get that out of the way. Now, while this is rendering, we'll take 2 or 3 minutes here. We'll talk about some other things. I can't do anything, but I can talk around what all this stuff is. All right. I do want it to finish out all the tiles so that we can see what we have and get a big picture of this particular rendering, big render job. Now, I'll pick on some of the easy things here while we have a few minutes in this session while it's rendering. You see here that you have output image type of PNG. I don't know if you noticed or not, but it is outputting as PNG. Now the PNG, in my opinion, is the only good choice of these three. The PNG is a lossless compression. It's their method of compression will give you a reasonably small file size with minimum loss of quality. That's the PNG. What is it? Portable graphic. Portable something. I forgot what the N means. Portable. Anyway, you can look it up. Now the JPEG, all right, that is a lossy compression method, and it does a lot of damage to the quality of your image. Now, let me say this. When you take a high resolution image like this, yeah, I mean, we're talking about 9,000 pixels by 6,000, and you break it up into individual tiles like that, you can't afford any loss in quality. You just can't afford it because you're going to get all kinds of compression artifacts that are going to be injected into each of these tiles, each of the tiles. And you don't want any quality issues at all with these tiles. You want the minimum quality issues. Now, I personally would never output my tiles as a JPEG. Never. JPEG is lossy. It gives you really nice small file sizes, but it does a job on your quality. When you start stitching or merging these tiles together, the last thing you want is some compression artifacts on this tile that are different to the compression artifacts on this tile. Because now you're going to start to see the tiles don't match well anymore, and that's not good. The PNG does not do it does compression, but it does it in an entirely different manner, where the PNG does not introduce these compression artifacts, which you cannot afford to have when you're dealing with multiple tiles. You have the ability to change the compression ratio here of this JPEG. You can get it to where there is like almost no compression, but you'll have big file sizes, but you're still not a good choice, in my opinion, for your tiles. The BMP is bitmap. It's very old. It is a lossless file management, but you get huge files, and it's a questionable as to whether or not the BMP is going to give you any better quality over the PNG. And you may actually find too that the bigger software editing tools will work with BMP, but it is very old, and a lot of people just don't want to use it anymore. I personally don't use the BMP for my tiles because it's not necessary to have huge, massive tile file sizes. All right. So let's do this. Let's end this session here. I'm going to go make some more coffee, and we're going to let this whole thing render out, and we're going to come back when it is rendering on the last tile. And then we'll pick up this discussion then. We'll take a look at the individual files that actually been produced. All right, and maybe I'll do a quick merging just to give you an idea how the merging happens, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, we got a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about. But I do want to get you in a position where you understand this whole tiling rendering process and, of course, the merging. And then we'll get into the more creative stuff as we go. All right. I'll see you in the next session, right about when we're down here rendering this last tile. I'll see you there.